What is going on, rock and roll fans, band members, future band members, and those who just love rock and roll in general? This is your host, Gavin, for the Tenacity Podcast with my good friend, Josh, and we're here to talk again about all things rock. Josh, how are you today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here, and I see the sun shining outside, and the sunshine is telling me that it's great to talk about all things rock today.
Absolutely. And what a time to talk about rock and roll today, guys. We've got a special episode for you. But again, all episodes are special. And today, what we want to talk about is rock and roll eras. So when I say rock and roll eras, let me explain myself really quick. We are talking about from 1950s on, there have been specific times in the rock and roll music's history where a certain type of rock has just taken the world by storm and built it to what it is today. So we want to give you guys a couple of those different rock and roll eras and what were some of the bands that were popular during that time. And of course, a lot of the older stuff, my good buddy Josh here is a huge fan. He's actually got to share when we talked about our favorite bands. There's a ton of those that he's been able to listen to, that he's got the privilege of enjoying through his childhood, that we're going to be able to be more familiar with on this call today. And so we're really excited for this podcast episode, but let's get right into it. We're going to start off with where it all got started. So for those of you who may not be as familiar, rock and roll is actually originates from the blues music. And in fact, it started in about the 1950s with, it is a combination of African American rhythm and the blues. And what some of the founding bands that were known, and actually some of the founding like artists that were really hit in the 1950s, which is when this has got started, with one of the first rock songs being done by Jackie Brenson and the Delta Cats, and then followed up by some amazing rock and rollers, Chuck Berry, and of course the king of rock himself, Elvis Presley. Josh, you want to lay it in some stuff on these?
Oh yes. So so really the birth of what we love, I mean of everything we love, because this was the very first of all of it. And so yeah, absolutely. So I think it was, I believe, 1955, very early February, I believe, 1955. So you got Chuck Berry, you got a band called Bill Haley in the Comets, and of course, one of my favorites, a guy named Little Richard, came out with a song called Tutti Frutti, and that was in February of 1955. And of course, my dad, will have him on the show sometime. For the viewers, that don't know my dad basically lived through all of that, so he could explain all that too. But I get a lot of my knowledge from that. But basically, never heard anything like this before. I mean, before this, you had blues, jazz, country and western, crooner music, but you never heard anything like it. So when everybody heard Little Richard's rock and roll voice for the first time, or when you hear Chuck Berry had a song called Maybelline came out that year, the electric guitar, and also Johnny B. Good, huge hit from him. Everybody knows Johnny B. Good.
That would be the song I'm always familiar with, is the Johnny B. Good. The intro is most recognizable from that era.
Oh, absolutely. And nobody had heard an electric guitar like that before. So it was, and then of course you fast forward to we go a little bit on, and of course everybody who is anybody knows who Elvis Presley is, the king of rock and roll. And I mean, he changed everything. I mean, everybody wanted to be cool like Elvis, and of course with his sound. And also you had a lot of other bands just coming out, and all of a sudden every kid wanted an electric guitar because they heard Chuck Berry, or every kid wanted to play fast on the piano because they heard Little Richard, or a guy named Jerry Lee Lewis who came out, who was real popular. I mean, So this is really special to talk about, because it is the birth of everything that we know and love today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And nobody has ever been as copycatted as far as the voice, more so than Elvis Presley, I feel like.
Yeah.
He's all over the place. You may see a copy, a lookalike in Vegas all the time. So many things have been talked about. In fact, he has his own documentary film that has come out last year, I believe, talking about his lifestyle and his stuff. Went out too soon, in all honesty, but an amazing man with a lot of groundbreaking that he did for the industry that we are now in, that we love so much. And speaking of groundbreaking,
just a good fact real quick, I forgot to plug this. I'll be brief on it. When we get my dad on here, this is something my dad would elaborate on. I think it'd be cool for him to mention. I think it was 1974. My dad actually got to see the man himself in concert. And so not too many people can say they've seen Elvis Presley in concert. And so, man, it's just, I'm always constantly asking my dad about that. Man, you got to see the real thing. You didn't see an impersonator. You saw the real deal. And so, anyway, I'm not going to steal his thunder. My dad can talk about that sometime. But man, just what a time, though.
Absolutely. And what a time when it got into the 1960s. We're talking about the British invasion. And stopping for a moment here, this is an era where a particular band came out that legitimately influenced rock for generations. Still doing it today with their groundbreaking songs that they were released. Their larger-than-life personas that they had on stage, and just their personalities that shine through, both in England and then going into America with the British invasion. And this band we're talking about is the Beatles. And then, of course, you can't talk about the British invasion without also talking about the Rolling Stones. But Josh, I know in one of our episodes we talked about the Beatles is one of your favorite bands out there.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The Beatles, I mean, of course, anybody knows, they've heard their name, the Beatles, right? So it's the Beatles, and it's like you just alluded to, they're so responsible for so many bands later on in the eras that we love and we talk about and we will talk about. And yeah, the Beatles came out and they just changed the course of things. And of course, with the British invasion, so many bands wanted to look like the Beatles, sound like the Beatles. And a good fact, actually, the Rolling Stones, who they're another band who I have a lot of respect for, who also inspired a lot of great rock bands to come. The Rolling Stones' very first hit was a song called "I Want to Be Your Man," and that was a song written by John Lennon and Paul McCartney from the Beatles. So the Beatles gave them their first hit. But absolutely, the Beatles are, I mean, you know, for those that don't know, Gavin will tell you, all my bandmates will tell you, we have a playlist on our Spotify of all our favorite songs, and pretty much Gavin can always tell, they can always tell whenever I've added songs to the playlist, because I'll add some songs that I like from all different artists, but then there'll be a large nonstop pattern of the Beatles. It'll just say Beatles, 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 and they'll say, "Oh yeah, Josh just added quite a bit of songs to the playlist." So I love the Beatles. They're my band, and then you know, just to see how they formed, the Beatles formed, and then even after they broke up, years after they broke up, even now they have their own radio station on XM, Sirius XM, the Beatles channel. Their merchandise still sells like hotcakes, all their shirts. And same with the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones, to this day, is huge. But what I wanted to elaborate on real quick is, to this day, Paul McCartney, 82 years old, and Ringo Starr, I believe, is 84. Same with Mick Jagger from the Rolling Stones. I give him credit, too. He's about 80, I think, 80 or 81. They're still killing it on stage. They have more energy than a lot of young bands do, and it's amazing at their age what they can do. But the conclusion to all this is just, if you don't know about the Beatles and you don't know about the Stones and all that, recommend, even if you're not into that era, go study it and see what they do, because Ozzy Osbourne, who we'll talk about in a little bit, Black Sabbath, he was very inspired by the Beatles, and I think he liked the Stones a lot as well. So just amazing what they were able to do for music. It's timeless. It's just, oh man. And I could go on and on, but that would be 5 episodes we'd go through. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It was an amazing era to be in rock because there's so many things that would spark from this era, the 1960s. I remember there's tons of bands that I enjoy and I listen to on a pretty regular basis that are inspired from this era, and that's why I love the fact that Josh, so like we both have we have a lot of music that is very similar between us that we enjoy, but I do notice that a lot of it comes from Josh is very familiar and very passionate about a lot of the older bands that have come and gone, or realistically, there are bands that have come out during this British invasion era of rock and roll that are still around to this day that put some bands that have come out now, they put them to shame because of how long they've been around, and they lasted longer than these other bands that came out after them. And so we need to talk about one who's not necessarily, I believe had a great band rolling for him, but he was a guitarist that touched the lives and hearts of so many guitarists that we know today. He is a pinnacle influence to their play style, what they do on stage. And we're talking about, this is going into the next era we're talking about. This is the psychedelic rock era, and this was in the 1960s as well. But the people that were crucial for this was the band Pink Floyd, and of course the man himself. If you've ever gone through any greatest guitarist list, this band's name pops up, usually at number 1, and we're talking about Jimi Hendrix. Oh, yes. And these are people. Jimi Hendrix is a man that influenced even the great guitarists like Kirk Hammett from Metallica. He was an incredible influence to him. He touched so many guitarists' lives on his play style. Just an incredible guitarist. But Josh, let us know a little bit on your take on these, like Jimi Hendrix, Pink Floyd, and some of the guys from the psychedelic rock era.
Right. So Jimi Hendrix, right off, when you hear Jimi Hendrix's name, I mean, actually, not just when you hear his name, when you see an electric guitar, I would predict that probably all over the world, when you see an electric guitar, at least when I see an electric guitar, you automatically have to think about Jimi Hendrix. The way he made the guitar talk, the way he shredded, the way he took it to a whole new level, the whole psychedelic. I mean, when I think of psychedelic rock, I mean, he's the first one I think about as well. Also, he was the beginning of it. So Jimi Hendrix is just all things rock when I think of just a guitar shredding. And even when I hear a new guitar player shredding, I think of the impact Jimi Hendrix had to even today. Today, people look up to Jimi Hendrix and want to play like him.
And wasn't, if I'm not mistaken, Jimi Hendrix is also a left-handed guitarist, I believe. Wasn't it? So he was, of course, there wasn't a lot of left-handed guitars that were out during that time. And I read something where Paul McCartney as well is a left-handed guitarist, where he plays everything left-handed. And so at that time, there weren't a lot of guitars out that were left-handed. So in order for you to make a guitar left-handed, you had to just restring it the other way around. And that actually took a lot of extra work to do. And I do remember, speaking to what Josh was talking about, Jimi Hendrix, if you haven't got to look at some of his, there are some videos recorded of some of Jimi Hendrix performances. And if you haven't seen anyone play the guitar with their teeth, you have to watch this man. This is a man that could, like Josh, to Josh's credit, I don't want to repeat a lot of what Josh said because, I mean, it's still in his credit, but like, this is a man who did so much with the guitar. And one of the few that I remember hearing said that the guitar was not just an instrument in his hands, it was a part of him. And
right.
Guitarists can make the guitar an extension of themselves. And that's
one of my all-time favorite performances. Of course, all his performances are great. I'm not saying one's not as good as the other, but one of the best performances of all time, not just from Jimi Hendrix, but of all time, in my opinion, was you go back to Woodstock 1969 and you watch his I think most people have heard it that know Jimi Hendrix. You've heard his version of the Star Spangled Banner, and Gavin, I know you've heard it too, and it's incredible how, I mean, I love the Star Spangled Banner. I'm very patriotic, and there's a lot of different people that'll sing it or play it that sound great. But man, I don't think anything, to me, in my opinion, beats Jimi Hendrix's performance at Woodstock '69 of that. I mean, he just, I mean, he just shreds it, and that's a hard one even to this day. There's been a lot of great performances of it, but that's a hard one to follow even to this day. I always pick, to this day, they've said, what's your favorite performance of an artist of the Star Spangled Banner? And I always say Jimi Hendrix, 1969 Woodstock. I mean, that, and you're familiar with that too. And he just incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now we got to move on to some other rock genre eras. And we're actually moving into, from the psychedelic rock genre, we go into the 1970s era. And this is when we get the punk rock scene. And this is categorized by bands like the Ramones, the Sex Pistols, and the Clash. And I do remember the Ramones having a lot of impact on a lot of bands during this era. But Josh, go ahead and talk a little bit about these bands for us.
Oh yes, well, Sex Pistols, right off when you mentioned Sex Pistols, a band I like a lot, "God Save the Queen" by the Sex Pistols. Just a great song. And then the Clash. Clash is another band I really like. "Should I Stay or Should I Go?" And of course that song came out in the early 80s, but a song that they had in the 70s that I really like, "London Calling." And of course the Ramones. I mean, everybody anybody loves the Ramones, but yes, absolutely. This is the birth of things to come. And of course this all is the birth of things to come, but this era right here, this is the early birth of punk rock. So many years after this, you get bands like Green Day, and you get, I mean, all these bands that we know and love, but absolutely these three bands right here are what put it together. I mean, they are just great bands.
And guys, while we're talking about these are bands that were pinnacle during these eras. Let us know what your favorite bands that came out during these different eras. We've been talking about the 1950s, the 1960s, the 1970s. Now, of course, if you don't have a band from that era, that's totally fine. Look these guys up for yourselves. I promise you, you're going to find something that you're really going to enjoy from these guys. And then actually have a little heritage of where the bands that you enjoy now, where some of their influences came from. And guys, I want to move on from the punk rock genre, because we're actually finally getting into an era where I know where a lot of my music comes from, and into the 1980s. And the first part of the 1980s, there's two parts into the rock era in the 1980s, which the first half would be considered the hair metal. And this is when, of course, long hair came into the scene with guys, and of course a lot of heavy rockers. And nobody rocked harder than the band at the time when they came out than Motley Crue. And Motley Crue was a band, I've listened to a lot of their different music. They're a band that not only sang the lifestyle that they were singing about, they lived the lifestyle that they sang about. For good or bad, they were pinnacle in that era. And then of course you also get bands like Poison, an amazing rock band. And then of course the legendary, still going today, Guns N' Roses, with that legendary frontman Axl Rose. Like, this was just an era where, and of course, kind of leading into some bands that aren't getting mentioned, that when I look at this up on documentaries, there's some bands that should be mentioned that haven't been. Of course, Metallica, a huge band coming out in the 1980s with Motley Crue, because they were actually coming out around the same time that Motley Crue was coming out, and they were in the same city, going back and forth, rival bands trying to make it in their own way, with Motley Crue taking a lot more of the the get up, the long hair, the crazy lifestyle, some of the costume that Motley Crue would put on. And then, of course, Metallica being this very much down to earth jeans, t-shirt, let's go. We're not here for a look. We're just here to rock as hard as we possibly can.
Right. Yeah. And there's so many honorable mentions that for different episodes, and for sake of time, we got to keep things brief. But there's, I mean, and also you got like bands like Twisted Sister, band, big man, Twisted Sister, and of course Warrant. Yeah. Warrant was huge, and I mean so many more to mention. But yeah. I mean,
and guys, that's why we want to make sure. Of course, we're keeping it brief in this episode with how many bands we mentioned, but we wanted to give you guys, when we talk about these eras of rock and roll, some of the bands that were popular, that were up and coming during these timelines. And of course, later on in the 1980s, we get introduced to one that I'm less familiar with. I'm getting more familiar with it day by day, but this is actually, we're coming into where my father's music is kind of born from. And we talk about the alternative rock era. This is where bands like REM, the band Pearl Jam, and of course, one of the few bands that for as short a time as they had, they were incredible. They were known for, they had an amazing song, an amazing frontman who was a genius in his own right. Talking about the band Nirvana that came out during this time. So many things that were coming out. The flannel style, long hair, jeans, whatever. The I don't give a crap attitude that came out with that. It was such a, I didn't know that you could actually make a voice that, I don't know if there's any way to make a voice that sounds as bored as Kurt Cobain's and make it still sound as good and deep as Kurt could make his voice go.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Nevermind's one of my all-time favorite albums. Nirvana's classic album, Nevermind. And they just when I heard them when I was young, when I heard Nirvana, I mean, it was just completely different. I mean, it was completely just next level stuff I had heard. Even though that came out a little bit before my time, I discovered it later. Man, I just couldn't believe how not only good the music was, how great Kurt. I loved his lyric ability. I loved his songwriting ability. I loved his vocals. Yeah, like you say, his vocals were, man, there's not too many people. Just he had his own way of creating that.
Yeah. And what I love about these different bands that we have that are on during the alternative rock, there are so many. Like REM was the one that had a different sound. They all had a very different sound from each other.
Yeah. The Smashing Pumpkins were great.
Yeah. It's rock, but it takes it in such a different perspective than what you would normally hear from some of the rock and roll bands that were coming out before this era. And then speaking of another era, an era where Nirvana and Pearl Jam seemed to still flourish was in the 1990s. And of course, we had a new one that came on the scene with them. And this is led by the frontman, Chris Cornell, Soundgarden.
Absolutely.
And that man, he had a voice.
Oh, absolutely.
Just some range. And I have to confess, there is a song that's done by one of these bands, Pearl Jam, that has been one of those, it's a harder song to listen to because of how emotional the song is. And it's the Last Kiss by Pearl Jam. And if you guys have not listened to that song, just be ready for any tear works because it is such a sad and depth song. It's an amazing song, and it showcases their lead singer's incredible voice, but such a deep, passionate song. If you haven't got to hear it yet.
And another band I would like to mention just real quick in this era that I really love is Stone Temple Pilots. They're of course, Interstate Love Song's one of my all-time favorite songs, but just I wanted to mention them too. The vocals, it's just everything's just they're amazing. And I mean, just if you haven't checked out Stone Temple Pilots, I would recommend. They're just one of my favorite bands of this era, also.
Absolutely fantastic. And then, guys, when we get into the 2000s, we don't really see a one genre kind of taking the lead. what's amazing about rock is that we have all these different eras of rock, but in the background we have these other styles that are starting to kind of come out into the open. And we get into the 2000s, we see so many. If you guys haven't got to yet, there are dozens of different rock genres, from emo, speed metal, death metal even has been one, thrash metal, there's every other metal under the sun, hard rock, classic rock, even a lot of these now became classic rock, punk rock, emo punk rock, and the list goes on and on about the different rock genres. And some of these guys that come out in the 2000s, there's some amazing rock songs that have come out. And I think one that, I know they were kind of getting started during this time, but in the 2000s, there was the band Nickelback. That was up and coming. And I'll tell you guys something really interesting about that band that I really love. One thing that keeps this band kind of near and dear to my heart is they were as my dad was actually growing into the man that he is today. He was on a personal journey of development and discovery, and growing up into the guy that he wants to be, that the father figure, the husband that he wanted to be, and the lifestyle that he wanted to live. And this band was growing up around the same time that he was that's where he was making those. So this was such a it's near and dear to my heart, because it almost feels like when I listen to them that I'm growing up with my father, kind of, because of how long, like where their popularity started is where his journey began. And it's such a good, amazing growth story that these guys have had throughout the years, and with my father as well, with the company that he started and the businesses that he's growing all on his own.
Yeah, it's just so many. I mean, sorry, I thought I lost my signal for a minute. No,
good,
but so many. I mean, so what you just alluded to a while back is about just the rock genre. Any mood you're in, there's a sound in rock music for it. I mean, whether it's I mean, you're feeling kind of down and out, okay, there's something for it. If you're feeling really if you're feeling the opposite, if you're feeling like with a lot of energy and you just want to get your energy out and going, okay, there's something for that too. Or if you're just if you want something real calm, there's calm rock. If you want something real aggressive, there's aggressive rock. I mean, this is the genre for everything. I mean, it literally, you could think of a band, or you could think of a song for any mood you're in rock.
And one thing too is the style of rock is always shifting. If you're looking for even country rock, there is a country rock genre. If you're looking for hip hop, or I call it rap, and now guys, let me know in the chat if I'm saying it wrong. I know some people call it hip hop. I call it rap. And that may be a slang term that I'm not as familiar with as I should be. But like, there's a genre for that in rock as well. I mean, there's hip hop artists in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So
you got bands like rap rock bands like Limp Bizkit, Rage Against the Machine. I mean, nu metal really is the term, but rap rock, nu metal, all in one. And of course, a band like Korn too, who you can obviously tell if you listen to a lot of their music, you can tell that there's a little hip hop influence with them too. So you could, I mean, yeah, I mean, it goes all over. And like you alluded to, country rock. Some people might not be familiar with that, but Falling in Reverse just did a country rock song with Jelly Roll. Great song. So yeah, just any mood. I just wanted to point that out real quick. It's just amazing how diverse rock music really is.
Absolutely. So guys, like, whatever you guys are looking for, whatever you're looking to listen to, it's amazing to know that whatever your mood is, whatever you're feeling, there's always going to be both an era and a song for you that's always attached to rock. And guys, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. If you enjoyed the music that was playing and the opening, that is actually a part of the band that me and Josh are part of. We are part of Tenacity, the same name as the podcast. We love all things rock, and we love being able to share the different things that we're learning about rock and roll music. And we love the things that we learn, the things that we have listened to our whole lives, being able to create our own music and be able to put it on the podcast for you guys. If you enjoyed that music, guys, let us know in the comments. Links for that song will also be available in the description. You'll be able to find it on the social media that you're watching this on right now. Whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, or even Twitter, you'll be able to find it on any of those platforms. We hope you guys have enjoyed today's episode. And until next time, keep on rocking in a free world, y'all.
Yeah, never stop rocking.
Take care, everybody.